Stop scrolling. Have you ever wondered why God allowed your mother to be toxic in your life? It's a question many of us, as God's chosen ones, have struggled with. We often ask, if God truly loves me, why would He place me in such a painful situation? It's a challenging question, but one that holds a deeper truth. Do you really believe it's just a coincidence that you were separated from your mom? No, this is not by chance. You are here for a divine purpose. You are one of God's chosen ones, and this separation wasn't random. God deliberately set you apart, and that pain, that emotional struggle, is not without meaning. It's not pointless. It's part of your preparation for a much higher calling. Think about Joseph in the Bible. He was betrayed by his brothers and sold into slavery, yet all that suffering was preparing him for a greater purpose, to save a nation. Now reflect on this. What if everything you've gone through, all the hurt, all the confusion, was actually meant to sharpen and strengthen you? God is molding you for something greater, something beyond what you can currently see. Don't ignore this moment. Ask yourself, are you truly ready? Ready to embrace the reason why God allowed you to experience this separation? Could it be that this is your moment to rise, to fulfill your God-given destiny? If this resonates with you, comment Amen or type 77 to claim your readiness for what God is preparing you for. You are chosen, but are you ready to step into the greatness that God has planned for you? God's chosen ones, this is the reason. God allowed your mum to be toxic. You have always sensed the heavy weight of separation, as if a deep chasm stood between you and the connection you longed for. Maybe this made you question your value, your place, or even your worth in the eyes of God. But remember this, that separation was never a sign of abandonment. It was, in fact, part of a divine design, a deliberate act from the Almighty to carve out space where He could mold you. He was shaping you for something greater, something far beyond the ordinary. Think of the story of Moses, who was also set apart, raised away from his people in Pharaoh's household, only to be prepared for the monumental task of leading the Israelites out of Egypt. The absence you felt wasn't an oversight, but rather a form of refinement. Like gold that is tested by fire, your soul has been tested through the trials of separation. God didn't separate you from your mother to deny you love. Instead, He set you apart so that you could experience a love far greater than what the world could ever offer. In those moments of absence and silence, God speaks to you more clearly. Just like when Elijah heard God's voice, not in the mighty wind or the earthquake, but in a still small whisper, your isolation has created a space for divine clarity. You were never meant to be like everyone else. Your path was destined to be different from the start. While others around you may have found comfort in the embrace of their mothers, you felt the ache of isolation. Yet, this isolation was not a sign of weakness. It was strength building. Just like Jesus, who spent 40 days in the wilderness being prepared for His ministry, you too have been stripped of earthly comforts so that you could learn to rely on God alone. The very separation you've wrestled with has been your spiritual forge. God sees the love you've longed for, the connection you may have envied in others. But what if that void was not a punishment, but a blessing in disguise? It was filled, not by human hands, but by God's divine intention. He needed to free you from the confines of earthly attachments, because your mission goes beyond the typical bonds that tether most people. Your calling requires a different kind of strength, a strength not cushioned by constant affirmation or maternal warmth, but sustained by the unshakable force of God's love. Look at the prophets, at Joseph, at David. They too were separated, isolated, and misunderstood. Yet that separation prepared them for their ultimate purpose. God's hand, unseen by many, has been shaping you through this very separation. So, ask yourself, are you ready to embrace the greater love, the higher calling that God has set apart for you? Look at the world as a battlefield, and you are not just any soldier. You are a warrior trained in isolation for a war you might not have even known you were fighting, while others may have leaned on the comfort and support of their mothers. God required something different from you. He asked you to learn how to fight alone. It is in the stillness of your isolation where you found Him most profoundly. The emptiness left by the absence of a mother's love wasn't a void. It was a space meant to be filled by a love far more perfect, one that is without fault and does not fade or fail. Your survival in what seemed like a void has built within you a strength that others cannot understand and a resilience that others may never match. This separation, this experience that felt like abandonment, was your training ground, not a punishment. Imagine the sculptor's chisel as it cuts into a block of marble. The rough edges are carved away, not to destroy the stone, but to reveal the masterpiece within. That's what God has been doing with you. Every moment of distance, every feeling of isolation was an intentional stroke from the divine hand, shaping you into the vessel God needs for His greater purpose. You may have seen it as a burden, a weight too heavy to bear, but that very burden is transforming into wings that will lift you higher. In His infinite wisdom, God removed the earthly comforts others cling to in order to bestow upon you a divine purpose. You were never meant to follow the crowd or to be held by the same bonds that tie others down. He separated you to sanctify you, to claim you as His own, untainted and free from the world's fleeting definitions of love. What you may have seen as absence, God saw as His powerful presence. What you thought was isolation was actually your invitation to step into the fullness of who you were always meant to be. Through this journey, you're being prepared for a higher calling, a purpose far greater than what the world could ever offer. Embrace this divine design, for you are truly one of God's chosen, set apart to walk a path of strength, resilience, and divine love. God's separation of you from your mother was never an accident. This emotional and relational distance was a deliberate move by the Creator, a divine signal that you are chosen. It may have felt like abandonment or neglect at times, but what you endured was actually part of God's refining fire. Think of the process as a smith forging a sword. The metal must be heated, hammered, and shaped to be made strong. Every conflict, every strained word, and every cold silence were the tools God used, like a hammer against stone, to chip away at the parts of you that were never meant to remain. In this divine chiseling, He has shaped you into something far more resilient, something capable of withstanding the storms that are yet to come. Every argument, every cutting remark, and every moment of manipulation was more than just hurtful. They were lessons in standing firm, lessons in recognizing your true worth, even when it felt like the world was tearing you down. Much like how Job faced relentless trials, your battles with your mother were not ordinary disagreements but cosmic clashes, struggles between who you are called to be and what the world, or even family, would have you remain. You've likely felt the sting of constant criticism, the kind that seems endless, that wears down the soul. The manipulation you endured may have twisted your emotions, making you question your value and identity. Yet, all of these experiences were not random. Each wound, each scar was intentional, a part of God's plan to prepare you for a destiny far beyond the ordinary. Consider Joseph, sold into slavery by his own brothers and later imprisoned unjustly. What appeared to be the ultimate betrayal was, in truth, God's preparation for him to rise to a position of unimaginable power and influence. Through these emotional and spiritual battles, you have gained an armor that few others possess. While others may falter under life's pressures, you have already survived the heat of the furnace. Like the 3 Hebrew boys who stood in the fiery furnace without being consumed, you too have come through the fire, stronger, sharper, and more equipped for what lies ahead. Your scars are not weaknesses. They are proof of your endurance. They are evidence of the strength God has forged in you through trials. While others may still be in the process of being refined, you have already been tempered. You have faced the furnace and survived. And now God is ready to use you for something far greater than the pain you've endured. The battles you faced with your mother were not just about conflict. They were about transformation, about becoming who God has always intended you to be. The question that haunts many is, why? Why did your relationship with your mother seem destined for pain and conflict? The answer, though simple, is profound. God never intended for you to find your identity in her. Her presence in your life, with all its toxicity, whether rooted in jealousy, her own unresolved wounds, or a lack of emotional support, was never meant to define you. Instead, this struggle was meant to reveal the insufficiency of earthly relationships and push you towards something greater, toward God Himself. In every moment where you sought her validation and were denied, God was training you to find your worth, not in human approval, but in Him alone. Consider the story of Hannah and her son Samuel in the Bible. Samuel's early separation from his mother was not to deprive him of love, but to prepare him for a life dedicated to God's service. Similarly, the emotional distance between you and your mother was meant to wean you from the need for earthly validation and lead you to discover your true identity in the Creator. You were not meant to seek approval from the world, not even from family. Your true value comes from God. Through this struggle, He has ensured that at your core, you understand where your worth truly lies. This separation, this lack of attachment, is not a mark of failure or deficiency. Rather, it is a sign that you were chosen for a purpose that transcends the ordinary bounds of human relationships. Others may find themselves tethered to the emotional chains of toxic family ties, bound by expectations and unhealthy dynamics. But not you. God has given you freedom, the freedom to walk a different path, to rise above the entanglements that hold others back. The emotional distance you felt from your mother is more than just a painful reality. It is a clear indication that God has set you apart for something extraordinary. The Bible tells us in Isaiah 49:1, "The Lord called me from the womb, from the body of my mother. He named my name." Your calling was decided long before you even experienced the pain of separation. Through every wound, every tear, and every lonely moment, God has been preparing you. You are not bound by the limitations of your family, nor by the expectations of others. You are chosen, separated for a divine purpose that few can fully comprehend, let alone achieve. Just as Joseph's years of betrayal and separation ultimately led to his rise as a leader who saved nations, so too has your separation been the evidence of the greatness to come. The trials you've faced are not the end of the story. They are the foundation upon which your destiny is being built. What others see as pain, God sees as preparation. You have been set apart not for ordinary purposes, but for a divine mission that reflects His glory through you. The division you've experienced within your family is not just random or meaningless. It is profoundly purposeful and scripturally rooted. In Luke 12:51-53, Jesus Himself declared that He did not come to bring peace, but division, even within families. This might seem harsh, but this separation is not just a disruption of harmony. It's a divine wedge that pulls you away from the ordinary, the expected, and the earthly, so that you can ascend to the extraordinary purpose God has for you. Your separation from your mother, the emotional and relational rift you've experienced is a direct manifestation of this divine divide. It is not a sign of failure or rejection. On the contrary, it is a mark that you have been set apart, chosen for something that goes beyond the bounds of familial ties and earthly expectations. This division often begins at the heart of the family, the very place where emotional bonds are strongest. Even Jesus himself faced this divide. In Luke 2:48-49, when his parents did not understand his mission, he distanced himself from their earthly expectations and said, "Didn't you know I must be about my Father's business?" In the same way, you too have been called to step away from the constraints, misunderstandings, and limitations placed upon you by family. Your mother may not understand the weight of your calling. She may see your journey as strange or even wrong, but this misunderstanding is part of God's design. This separation pulls you away from what is familiar and comfortable to sharpen and prepare you for the divine mission you've been given. Your mother's disapproval or inability to grasp your path is not a reflection of your worth or value. Instead, it reflects the fact that your calling defies ordinary measures. You were never meant to seek her approval or base your identity on her acceptance. God's purpose for you required this separation, however difficult, so that your identity would be deeply rooted in Him rather than in any human relationship. The division is painful, yes, but it is also essential. God's love for you is too fierce, too intentional, to allow you to remain tethered to anything that might hinder your ascent into the extraordinary purpose He has prepared for you. Consider the struggles your mother faces, her jealousy, her brokenness. These things may blind her from understanding the heights to which God is calling you. Her words of criticism and manipulation were never meant to destroy you, although they may have felt that way. Instead, they were like the hammer striking the anvil, shaping you into someone who could rise above earthly wounds and grasp divine strength. Her emotional sabotage, as painful as it was the very tool God used to forge you into a warrior, a person who can withstand the trials and storms that lie ahead. You were not chosen for an easy path, but for one that requires resilience and the strength to break away from anything that might weigh you down. Just as Joseph was betrayed by his own family and sold into slavery, his path wasn't easy, but God used every hardship to position him for greatness. So too, your separation is not a punishment, but a necessary preparation. You were chosen for a path that demands you to rise above the ordinary, a path that requires you to leave behind anything that holds you back from becoming all that God has destined you to be. This is the evidence of your calling, the reason for your struggles, and the proof that you are being refined for something far greater than the pain you've endured. Jesus, who was separated from his own earthly family, deeply understood the pain of being misunderstood by those closest to him. Just as he faced this division, you too are called to a higher purpose that will often create a gap between you and those you love. This gap is not accidental. It is an intentional space created by God where His voice becomes clearer and His purpose for your life becomes undeniable. In this space, you are no longer bound by human expectations, but are instead free to fully embrace the divine calling that God has placed on you. The division within your family, especially the separation from your mother, is perhaps the clearest sign that God has set you apart. You are not meant to remain confined within the limits of earthly relationships that cannot contain the full magnitude of your purpose. Consider how Jesus distanced himself from the expectations of his family in Matthew 12:48-50, when he said, "Who is my mother and who are my brothers?" as he pointed to his disciples, signifying that spiritual relationships were even more important than earthly ties. In the same way, you are called to something greater, and this separation is God's way of ensuring that nothing holds you back from fulfilling your divine mission. Every tear, every heartache, and every conflict with your mother has been a step closer to the person God is molding you to become. These moments were not meant to break you, but to build you into someone who is chosen for a higher purpose. You are chosen, and the division you feel is not just painful, it is your path to greatness. Like the prophet Jeremiah, who was set apart before birth for God's work, Jeremiah 1:5, you too have been consecrated for a unique calling, and this separation is a sign of that calling. The separation from your earthly mother, with all the heartache and unresolved tension it carries, serves a divine purpose. When the love and support that should naturally come from a parent fall short, or when it feels absent, it may feel like abandonment, but in truth, you are not left alone. God Himself steps in to fill the gaps left by human relationships. This is not just a consolation prize, it is an intentional part of His design. The emotional distance and lack of fulfillment in that relationship have become tools that propel you closer to God with a force that cannot be ignored. Every unmet emotional need, every moment of loneliness is not wasted. These moments serve as catalysts for your deeper connection to God, who draws you nearer in ways that an earthly parent never could. Just as David found refuge in God during times of isolation, writing in Psalm 27:10, "Though my father and mother forsake me, the Lord will receive me." You too are being drawn into a closer relationship with the divine. This separation is not a sign of failure or inadequacy, but of your higher calling. God has set you apart to walk a path where He alone fills your emotional needs and gives you strength. The love you sought from an earthly source is now being fulfilled in a way that is eternal and unshakable, guiding you toward the destiny God has always intended for you. God is not merely a replacement for what you lack, He is the original source of everything your soul craves. While an earthly mother may provide nurture and care, God offers something far deeper, a love that is unwavering, boundless, and infinitely perfect. The separation you feel from your mother is not a punishment or an oversight. It is a deliberate removal of distractions that might keep you from fully depending on the strength and protection that only God can offer. What you may perceive as emotional neglect or failure from your mother is, in fact, the space where God's presence takes root and grows stronger. He doesn't just meet your needs, He surpasses them in ways only He can. In this space of separation, God's role in your life becomes undeniable. The world often tells us that the bond between parent and child is unbreakable and essential for our well-being, but God has chosen to break that mold in your life. The earthly ties that others cling to for comfort, security, or identity, God has loosened them for you. Why? To ensure that your attachment to Him remains unshakable. He desires for your dependence to be on Him alone, undiluted by the affections, expectations, or shortcomings of a human relationship. Through every tear, every moment of silence, and every unmet need from your mother, God was building in you a spiritual resilience that draws its strength from a well that never runs dry. Consider Psalm 23:1, where David declares, "The Lord is my shepherd. I lack nothing." God has been shepherding you through this separation, ensuring that your spiritual and emotional needs are met by Him in ways that no human could fulfill. He is your source, your provider, and your protector. Your earthly mother, with all her limitations, could never have filled the divine role that God holds in your life. Her inability to meet your emotional or spiritual needs was not a reflection of your worth, but a signal that those needs were always meant to be fulfilled by your Heavenly Father. God did not design you to rely on human affection for validation or completeness, because He knew that no human could give you the perfect love, guidance, and protection that only He offers. The separation you feel is in reality an invitation to lean fully on God and to find in Him everything you have ever longed for. This separation was always part of God's divine plan to strengthen your dependence on Him. As the emotional ties to your earthly mother weakened, your connection to God intensified. Just as Paul learned to rely on God's strength even in weakness, saying in 2 Corinthians 12:9, "My grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness." You too are learning that God's strength is made perfect in the absence of human comfort. The more distant your relationship with your mother became, the closer you were drawn into the arms of your Creator. He saw your pain, your confusion, and all your unanswered questions. And through it all, He has been patiently waiting for you to realize that He is the one who provides all that you need. He is not merely a spiritual crutch. He is the firm foundation on which you stand, the everlasting source of strength that no earthly relationship could ever match. You are commanded to honor your mother, not because of how she treated you, but because of who you are called to be. The division between you may be undeniable. It was forged by divine purpose, not by mere circumstance. God's plan for you required this separation, but even in the midst of this distance, His word remains clear. You must still honor her. This command, found in Deuteronomy 5:16, is not conditional upon her behavior or the pain you've endured, but upon your identity as one of God's chosen ones. Your response to this instruction is not a reflection of her worthiness, but of your obedience to God. Honoring your mother is a radical act of spiritual defiance against the wounds inflicted upon you. It's not about erasing the scars or pretending that the emotional distance doesn't exist. It's about rising above the pain, stepping into the calling that sets you apart, and choosing to walk in the path God has laid before you. To honor her means to acknowledge the role she has played in shaping your life, however flawed that role may have been. It means refusing to let bitterness take root, and instead allowing grace to flourish in its place. Your honor is not submission to her control, nor is it an endorsement of the wrongs done. It is a reflection of your strength in God. This act of honoring her is crucial for your spiritual growth. It requires you to confront the raw edges of your pain, not in surrender, but in victory. It transforms you, teaching you to forgive, not because she deserves it, but because you need it. In doing so, you break free from the chains of resentment that would otherwise hinder your spiritual progress. The honor you offer is not for her benefit, but for yours. It becomes the gateway to the blessings that God has prepared for you. To carry unforgiveness or harbor bitterness is to close yourself off from those blessings that God intends for you. God is not asking you to reconcile or repair what may seem irreparably broken. Instead, He is asking you to rise above it, to honor her in the midst of division, because your obedience to His command is what matters most. By honoring your mother, you align yourself with God's will, and in that alignment, true spiritual power is found. This is not about appeasing her or fulfilling societal expectations. It is a declaration of your allegiance to God's word, even when it costs you emotionally. It's not about your mother's worthiness or your own justification, but about the person you are called to be. You are chosen, set apart, and God requires more from you than the world demands from others. The honor you show your mother, despite the division, is not about her. It's about your obedience to the divine calling on your life. The separation you've experienced is not a punishment, but rather a crucible, a refining fire designed to burn away what is unnecessary and shape you into the person God needs you to become. You are not like others, bound to the familiar and content in the ordinary. God has called you higher, and with that calling comes a requirement for growth that others may never fully understand. Through this obedience, you affirm your allegiance to God's greater purpose. The strength to honor her despite all odds demonstrates that you are not defined by your wounds, but by the grace of God that sustains you. This journey of honor and obedience to God's word refines you for the extraordinary path ahead. for you have been chosen for something far greater than the pain you've endured. This separation, this cutting away of old ties and comforts, is God's way of pruning your life so that you can bear the fruit needed for His kingdom. What feels like isolation is actually sacred ground for transformation, where you're being molded, strengthened, and prepared for your divine purpose. While the sharp edges of loneliness may cut deep, it is precisely in this space, removed from earthly connections, that God's hands are at work the most. This isolation is not a sign of abandonment, but a deliberate act by God to set you apart for a greater task. In John 15:2, Jesus says, "Every branch that bears fruit, He prunes so that it will be even more fruitful." Just as a gardener cuts away the unnecessary to promote growth, so too has God removed relationships that once defined or even limited you. The distance from those who were once close is not random. It's God's intentional act to clear the distractions so that you can hear His voice alone. The voices that once filled your world have been silenced, allowing space for God's voice to speak more clearly into your life. True growth happens not in the presence of comfort, but in the furnace of refinement. Every moment of separation you've endured is a tool in God's hands, shaping you into a vessel strong enough to carry His purpose. This division is not to weaken you, but to strip away the vulnerabilities that could hold you back from fulfilling the role He has assigned to you. Just as metal must be heated and hammered to become unbreakable, so too are you being forged in the heat of this separation. The relationships that once defined you, that may have even limited your growth, are being removed because they no longer serve the higher purpose God has in mind. This pruning isn't a punishment, it's a promotion, a call to a higher level of faith and strength that requires more from you than you could have imagined. Don't be alarmed by the separation from your mother or others. It is not a sign of failure, but a powerful confirmation of your calling. God is removing the familiar comforts because they can no longer hold the magnitude of what He's about to do in your life. This division is not a stumbling block, it is a stepping stone. Just as Joseph was separated from his family, betrayed by his brothers, and left alone to be molded into the man who would save nations, so too is your separation part of the divine plan unfolding for your life. It's a signal that God has set you apart for something greater. You were never meant to be confined by earthly relationships that cannot grasp the magnitude of your purpose. God has removed the distractions, sharpened your focus, and is molding you into a vessel that will carry His mission. Every moment of pain, every feeling of distance, is God chiseling away the excess and bringing forth the strength and resilience that only He can shape within you. You are set apart. This separation is proof that God has chosen you for something far beyond what you can see now. What feels like loss today is the foundation of your future victory in fulfilling God's greater plan. God is orchestrating a plan for your life that requires your focus, your dependence on Him, and your ability to rise above what others may never understand. You were not made to blend into the ordinary. You were designed for the extraordinary. This separation is not an accident. It is part of the purification process, ensuring that your purpose is fulfilled without hindrance. It's not rejection, it's refinement. God is meticulously shaping you, ensuring that you become exactly who He has called you to be. Now is the time to embrace this truth and walk confidently in the knowledge that your story and struggles are not in vain. They are a testimony to the work that God is doing within you. Every hardship, every moment of isolation has been a building block for the greatness He has planned. Consider the story of Esther, who was separated from her family and raised in a foreign land. Yet this very separation was what prepared her to save her people at a pivotal moment. Your separation, likewise, is preparing you for a purpose far greater than you can imagine. You are not defined by your past relationships or the pain of separation, you are defined by the divine calling that marks your life. Step forward boldly, knowing that this is part of your preparation for greatness. In Romans 8:28, it says, "And we know that in all things God works for the good of those who love him, who have been called according to his purpose." Your current trials are working together for your ultimate good, aligning you with the divine purpose God has designed for you. Share your story, share your growth, for you are not alone in this journey. Just as God is working in your life, your testimony can be a light for others, encouraging them to find strength in their own moments of separation and trust in God's perfect plan. Let your story be a reminder to others that God's refining fire is not to destroy, but to purify, to prepare his chosen ones for the extraordinary mission he has set before them. You are chosen, set apart, and the separation you have experienced is proof that God is preparing you for something far greater than you can currently see. Trust in his plan, walk boldly in your calling, and let your life be a testimony of God's faithfulness and his perfect timing. As you reflect on your journey, remember that God's purpose for you is unfolding, and every step has been intentional. If this message resonates with you, we encourage you to like this video and subscribe to the channel for more content that uplifts and strengthens your faith. Share your thoughts and experiences in the comments below. Let us know how God is working in your life, and let's encourage one another as we walk this path together.